Hello, friends. Welcome back to Undoctrinate Yourself. I don't usually record intros, but I felt compelled to record an intro for this podcast for a couple of reasons. In this episode, I interviewed David Herrera, who's at the Solar Athlete on Instagram. And he works a lot in the performance space as it relates to quantum biology and mitochondrial medicine. And when I came into this conversation, we hadn't really chatted before, so I was very curious just to get to know him and his approaches. And I thought we were going to end up talking about performance, but the conversation that we ended up having was actually far more important in my mind. And it's actually, I think, is going to be one of the most important episodes that I've published so far. Of course, Jack's are right up there as well, but this one is really special. We dove into Bitcoin and decentralized health as it relates to decentralized wealth and the importance of decentralization in finance when it comes to creating health and creating a life that really feels worth living. And so I hope you guys enjoy this episode. At the beginning, again, I kind of introduced it as I thought we were going to talk about performance, not realizing that our winding conversation would lead us down the road of Bitcoin and decentralized finance. And I think the conversation went exactly where it needed to go. And I hope you enjoy it. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Undoctrinate Yourself. Today, I have a very special guest. This is David Herrera, and he's going to be telling us about, I think, performance as it relates to the sun story and quantum biology, which I'm really stoked about because I've recently been more so focused on actually the performance aspect myself. I've been working with a cohort of about a dozen athletes that we're going to be basically doing this fall, putting them through mitochondrial optimization protocols and measure their performance gains during that period of time of like 3 or 4 months. So I'm excited to hear your take on this topic and what you've been incorporating in your life.
Awesome. Thank you. That's very interesting. Yeah, I didn't know that. That's great. It's really cool. So yeah, so my kind of journey in all of this started at a very personal level, just for my own performance type benefits of being a power lifter and just somebody who trained very regularly, but at a high level. So I have set some world records in powerlifting, and um, there's a lot of performance, especially in powerlifting, because it's not a tested sport. It's not an Olympic sport. There's a lot of performance aspects that go along with like PED use, performance enhancing drugs, and things of that nature. And so that's what led me down the path of just knowing more about biology and how things work and how things interact. Because it's one thing to just take a drug and just get performance benefits. It's another thing to know what exactly am I affecting at the biological level, right? And that actually is the key to good performance enhancing, whether you're doing it naturally, whether you're doing it with drugs. If you don't actually know the mechanisms that you're dealing with, you can quickly run into issues, especially with drugs, actually, because they all have unintended consequences to some degree. Um, and so that's when I started following Jack Cruz. So that was already like 6, 7 years ago. Yeah, somewhere in there. Um, and that was more from the side of, okay, so I'm taking some of these things, and there are also low hanging fruit, because even people in this realm of where I come from, whether it's bodybuilding or powerlifting or performance sports, there's always you got to also eat right to gain the right benefits. You also have to rest well and all of that type of stuff. But when you really kind of put that all into like one basket, it really is about optimizing how your body interprets when it should rest and when it should be active, right? Like at the end of the day, that's what it all comes down to. And that's when I started looking into a lot more of what Jack was talking about with circadian biology and quantum biology at the level of the mitochondria, which is what's dictating all of these actions, whether it's going to be, you're active or you're sleeping, etc. And that led me to just implementing some really, really raw basic stuff, which he, has been preaching for a long time, which is, hey, you get outside, you get some morning daylight every single day, no matter what. Um, you dissipate inflammation by grounding and those types of things. So just little stuff, right? I never really told anybody a lot about it until I started dealing with clients myself. Right. And then at that point in time, that's when I'm like, well, because a lot of people are like, well, I can't sleep or this, right? I'm like, well, why don't you just try some blue light blocking glasses and reduce your EMF blue light exposure at night? see if that helps, right? And right away, within a week, most people will see a benefit, and especially with the blue light blocking glasses, some people see it almost immediate, right? You have the glasses on, you're like, man, I'm falling asleep. I'm like, yeah, that's the point. Um, and so that then just led me to go full force into a lot more of this, as far as like implementing it, even to the point now where I'm building a new house and I'm implementing a lot of these strategies into my house. Like I'm putting solar tubes in there with quartz glass. I'm putting skylights in the house with quartz glass so that the inside now becomes the outside and vice versa. I went ahead and even made my whole foundation a cement foundation and put extra grounding rods in it to make sure that the cement itself is essentially as grounded as the ground outside. Um,
Whoa.
so things of that nature have just kind of led me to lean into it full force, if you want to call it that, or I'm all in.
That's amazing. So did you feel benefits almost immediately, and that's why you really built momentum in this direction? Or what differences
Yeah,
did you
yeah. So
notice?
number one, when I was so there's a little bit of a story there, but when I was doing all of my powerlifting leading up to the best meet that I've ever had back in 2020, um, I was implementing the grounding and getting outside regularly and getting as much sunlight as I could, barring that I had a 9 to 5 job, right? So I worked in the oil field and I had to be, I had to have all my personal protective equipment on. So long sleeves, all of that type of stuff. But whenever I was home, I was always in my shorts. I was always very, very, having as much skin exposed as possible. And I did see benefits. I saw benefits that seemed to make me genetically gifted in terms of recovery, right? Like some of the workloads that I would put myself through, obviously I was using some PEDs and things of that nature, but and I have a mentor in that realm that his name is Roderick Chavez, that is very well known in PED augmentation and stuff like that. And we would have discussions and we would talk about some of the dosages that I would use and stuff like that. He's like, you know, you either are a hyper responder to these drugs or something about your physiology makes you get more out of the drugs than normal. He's like, you're using about a third of what most people would be using to get the benefits that you're getting. Right. So I didn't really think about it too much other than things were going really well. And then when I moved to full-time coaching, I obviously didn't go to my 9 to 5 job anymore. And I figured it would just lead to more and more progress. The problem was I had a cell phone tower built next to my house in that time, right? So about 8 months, maybe closer to a year before I quit my 9 to 5 job, uh, there was a cell phone tower built next to my house, and it was one of those things where me and my wife kind of looked at each other and kind of knew something is going to need to happen. We just didn't know what, and we didn't really know what to expect, right? Because that was back in 2019, right? So it's that's 5 years ago now, and because I was going to my 9 to 5 job, I didn't actually experience much of anything because I wasn't physically really there that much. But then I quit my job, and then I'm all of a sudden at the cell phone tower all the time. And the first thing that I started to notice was tendon and ligament problems, um, because that's my sport, right?
Right.
Everything around powerlifting is as much load as possible as that your body can handle. And I started to experience tendon and ligament problems. Clearly, under recovery. I'm like, this really doesn't make sense, especially with the drugs that I'm taking. And then I kind of ignored it by just taking some time off from training, and it would make me feel better. And then I would resume training, and about less than 6 weeks into a training regimen, I'd start to feel the symptoms again, and to the point where even my lymph nodes got inflamed. Um,
Wow.
to the point where I flared up an ABV stage, right? And so they thought I might have some kind of lymphoma cancer and stuff like that. So I just canned the training for a little bit, and at that point in time, I did a consultation with Jack Cruz, and basically he's like, no, dude, you're kind of beating around the bush. It is the cell phone tower. You are being inundated by the cell phone tower. It's like you're gonna have to sell your house. So obviously that was a hard thing to do, but we got a building biologist to test our house and everything. And sure enough, the microwatts in my house was 80,000 to 100,000 microwatts per meter squared all the time, all the time,
Wow.
24/7. So immediately we listed our house. It took about 4 months to sell, and we ended up selling it two springs ago. So April of 2022. And no, is that no, April of 2023. Sorry, April of
Uh-huh.
2020. And and immediately we started the remediation process. And that's when I really started to notice the benefits of sunlight and grounding and stuff like that. Like and cold really while I was living at the cell phone tower, right? Because while I was living there, I did very little training just because I didn't want to aggravate things. I didn't want to get injured, but I would do a lot of cold exposure. I was lucky enough that I had a basement that had a cold storage room that had all four walls was concrete. So inside of that, there wasn't any EMFs. I could close it because I bought a steel door for it. So I put a steel door in it. And then when I would go in there and enclose myself in it, there was zero EMF in there. But it was 15 degrees, right, in the winter. So I would go in there and lay, naked on the concrete and do my breath work in there. And that would actually make it feel better to the point where I could handle my client load and do my normal work for several hours at a time. Like I could come out of there very clear headed and stuff like that. So I started to notice the benefits of grounding and cold exposure even while at the cell phone tower, just by implementing that strategy of my morning routine was essentially go in that room and get as cold as possible for about an hour and then come out, eat my breakfast, and then do as much work as I could until brain fog would set in and things of that nature that I'm sure a lot of people deal with
Wow.
enough technology.
Wow.
And and then after we sold our house, the first thing we did was started traveling a lot to sunny places. So we spent 2 months in El Salvador that summer, uh, um, and that was the biggest remediation effect that we did. And that was so we sold our house in late April, and all of July and all of August we spent in El Salvador. And from that point forward, because my wife had symptoms that we didn't really associate with that, one of them was acid reflux, like permanent acid reflux, like to the point where she was uh, she got a scope, a colonoscopy, trying to figure out what was going on. And the doctors are like, oh, your esophageal sphincter is open. It's just staying open. We don't really, there's not a fix for that. So here's some, Pepsid or whatever, Prilosec, and it got to the point where she was taking that for a whole year every day and sometimes having to double dose it just because it wouldn't close. But as we know now, right, that's due to what it's not a real term, but what I call demyelination internally, right? Because those types of muscles, smooth muscles, need a lot of melanin around them to constantly have an electrical charge. And so 3 weeks after being in El Salvador, her acid reflux went away, 100% away. She's never had to take a medication again since then. And then for me, the benefits that I've seen is my recovery is now back to normal, to what I expect, to my previous levels. And with basically just my TRT dose, right? Like that, like I'm not taking enhancement beyond just what a normal doctor would prescribe you for TRT replacement, just from my decade of powerlifting, which is something that I knew would probably happen. That really has highlighted that this is probably the most important thing. There's no amount of drugs that will get you out of being interacted with by EMFs or lacking solar exposure or melanin internally. There just isn't. That whole situation really highlighted that to me.
It's crazy that they can just build cell towers by your house without any sort of, validation process or like
Yeah, there
consent.
really isn't there isn't any what I would call safety uh
Right.
measurements being done. There's the obvious of building something there, right? You will get a notification, hey, there's this being built. You can come to the town meeting or the city town hall meeting to where they're going to pass that, but and object if you want. But there isn't any what I would call quality control going on. There is zero of that in the United States because there isn't any laws that require them to do that. Because all they require is that the person that the property owner that they're building the cell phone tower on agreeing to them, right? And that's exactly what happened. The property literally was in my backyard. I could throw a rock and hit the cell phone tower.
Wow.
Right? It was less than 100 yards away from my house. The property that it was on was a state-owned property, right? So
Mm.
the state just agreed to let them build it there, and that's all the permission they really needed.
Yeah, I feel like we're in denial societally about the effects of non-native EMF, cell towers, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, everything like that. And
Mhm.
part of that's because the research quality is pretty poor, which I think is in relationship to our let's say the government at least not wanting to know the answer to these questions. Like, it just seems crazy, like from my perspective as a scientist, that like, who is designing these studies, who is doing them, and like, why aren't we doing more? And I was just talking to Scott Zimmerman yesterday. I had him on the podcast, and we were
Okay.
chatting about how in technology we are always like having to backtrack after the tech is already rolled out. Then we're like, well, maybe it's not so good for this, versus doing the research up front to show that it's safe. It's pretty wild.
It
But
is. Yeah. And when you start talking about um, uh, the whole 5G and Wi-Fi to people, right? Just normal people, they tend to immediately place you there. So over the last, I would say 3 years, I've just kind of accepted that role of that's where I'm going to be in the group of friends that I have or whatever, right? So at this point, I don't hesitate in talking about it, no matter what people say. But it does kind of feel that way from normal people as like, hey, David, you're kind of sounding a little bit crazy. Do I really need to turn off my Wi-Fi at night to get good sleep benefits? But the great thing about this is if you just do it, it doesn't cost you anything. But if there are benefits to be had, you will feel them and you will fulfill them. You will get those benefits. So I don't ever really hesitate to tell anybody about it, because if they just happen to do it for, I don't know, 3 or 4 nights in a row, they're the ones that message me later that are like, oh, that clearly made a difference. Somehow it made a difference. I don't really know how, but it did. And that's all that really is needed about just getting out the information, right? It's one thing to say that 5G is bad for you. It's another thing to tell people how to mitigate it, right? Which is actually very low hanging fruit for most, right? I'm not saying that everybody will be able to mitigate it just by turning off their Wi-Fi at night. It really depends on your actual living situation. But and that's actually kind of the more difficult part of like teaching people about this is it does really depend on exactly where you live.
it does, yeah. And sometimes the answers aren't easy. Like, sometimes it does require you to move, which is rough. I mean, I think for most people, though, that maybe isn't the case, which is a good thing. There's a lot that you can do to optimize your home environment no matter where you are. But if, you're running into mitochondrial issues, you're still symptomatic even after doing everything, then sometimes you have to really think about making some big
Yeah.
changes in your life, whether it's quitting the
Yeah.
job or moving to a
Yeah.
different
And
house.
yeah, I mean, that's literally what I had to do, right? Like that, I had to sell my house, and the the financial environment that we were moving into when I sold my house was that of, hey, if I don't buy a house right away, I'm not going to be able to buy a house of the same quality, right? Because of inflation and all of that type of stuff. But luckily enough, even before Jack Cruz, I was already into Bitcoin for a long time, just
I was going to ask you about that.
because of PEDs, literally. So I got into Bitcoin because of PEDs, because that was the only way you could buy them when I
Ah,
started 10 years ago,
makes
right?
sense.
So, and I never really owned it. I just used it as a means of exchange until about 2018, 2017, right? And so I already kind of knew that that was going to be the how I save money. So it was a hard thing to kind of do, list her house and sell her house, especially when my wife starts running numbers and she's like, we either got to buy a house right away, and that's going to be hard to find another good quality house with zero EMFs in the current environment that we live in, right? The town that we live in and stuff like that. So really, the decision was more of, do we want to keep living in the town that we live in? Because our kid, I have kids that are 12, 10, and 7, right? It's not like we got to take them away. But luckily enough, we also homeschooled because of the COVID thing. So it made it much easier to move, 20 minutes away into a town. Like currently, the town that I live in only has 200 people total. And there is no cell phone towers. Like the nearest cell phone towers is 10 miles away. So this is a place where the horizon for the next 5 to 10 years is something that is very positive in terms of electromagnetic field pollution and stuff like that. So this came down to, how do we build a house in the inflationary state that we're going to be facing? And we ended up turning all of our house money into Bitcoin at that time, back in 2023.
Wow.
Thanks.
That was good foresight too. And I mean, things are only going to go up based on, RFK Jr.'s and Trump's speeches at Bitcoin. Very, exciting times coming within the decentralized currency space. So I think, how do you feel about that?
Yeah, I do. It's one of those things where that because of the ETFs, I
Yeah.
feel like its upside is infinite, but its volatility is also infinite, right? Because now you have people with lots of liquidity that can move the price, right? So, or keep the price at a state. So it's going to require real Bitcoiners, uh, or people that get into the Bitcoin space to become real Bitcoiners, which is basically you own it and you don't mess around with like keeping it on exchanges and getting liquidated and things of that nature. That will be what ends up happening to most people that get into Bitcoin because they feel that they can uh out trade the people with lots of liquidity, right? We're talking about the Vanguards, the Black Rocks, etc. They're gonna have so much liquidity that when they want the price to go down, the price will go down. But that's also an opportunity, right? I don't see it as a how would I say? I don't see it as a negative. I see it as it's a cautionary thing of when you should buy, right? Like or when you should get out, right? Like it's going to require a little bit more forethought on how cycles are timed and stuff like that. That's my personal opinion on that. You're going to see much crazier swings in price, especially as the price goes higher and higher, right? You're going to see the price reach 300,000, 500,000, but you will also see it at in that same year that it might reach 300,000. It might go all the way down to 100,000, right? Like that's where people are really going to, like people that aren't true Bitcoiners are not going to survive that type of environment.
Can you describe what an ETF is for people who are listening that don't know?
Yeah. So an ETF is basically a trading instrument. For example, let's just hypothetically say that I'm BlackRock, right? Just I have this much Bitcoin, right? And you're one of my customers. I can, for a certain fee and a certain amount of money, I can allocate a certain amount of my Bitcoin to your portfolio, right? And as more customers come, I'm then required to buy more Bitcoin, right? BlackRock or me as a person or a bank, right? I have to physically own that asset in order to offer it as as a product that you can invest in, right? Now, that's what's called spot ETFs. Now, there's future ETFs. Those are fake, right? Those are not the company or the whoever's offering a future ETF is not required to own any Bitcoin. All they have to do is they're only required to have the capital in some form, mostly dollars, that equals that amount of Bitcoin. Those are future ETFs. The spot Bitcoin ETFs required to actually own the Bitcoin, right? That's why the price will go up much more impactfully because they physically have to go out and buy that Bitcoin. But at the same time, they can sell that Bitcoin for their customers because again, they are handling you as the customer, right? If you went to BlackRock and bought a certain amount of shares of the Bitcoin ETF that they offer, they're also managing that trading for you. So what if they go short with your stuff? You're going to make money. The customer's going to make money, right? And BlackRock's going to sell that Bitcoin ETF and the price will go down, but you're going to make money. You don't care as the customer, right? That's kind of the situation that's been invited. Potential upside is enormous, but that also opens up the Bitcoin price to higher amounts of downside. Again, not going to zero. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is when BlackRock wants more Bitcoin, they can easily sell 50% of their allocation, drop the price to whatever is more profitable for them, and then buy it right back up, right? Whereas you, as average Joe, that might liquidate you if you happen to leave it on an exchange or you think that you're going to trade it and multiply your Bitcoin. That would probably liquidate. That's actually what they're trying to do, right? They have, you know, trading algorithms and trading AI where they know where people have bought, they know where people have their stops, they know all this stuff. So they're like, okay, when enough people have their liquidation level at this price, that means that if we liquidate them, we get all their Bitcoin. We can immediately buy that back up, right? And because Bitcoin is non-proliferatable, meaning they can't be made more of, they have to come up with strategies like that to get more Bitcoin, right? So again, being a true Bitcoiner, you're not going to leave your Bitcoin on an exchange, number one, if you are a true Bitcoiner. So that Bitcoin is not at risk for that type of activity anymore. And so that's number one that the people have to understand in terms of what the ETFs kind of represent.
And so you recommend that, well, I don't know if you recommend, but what you do is keep your Bitcoin in an external wallet, I presume.
Yep.
Yep.
Keep it on your wallet, your keys, your coins. And once it's there, I only, again, I don't live in El Salvador yet. I am hoping to live in a place where I don't have to exchange my Bitcoin for anything. But when I do need to exchange it, right, like I'm building a house and I turned my house profit into Bitcoin a year ago, so I have to liquidate some of that. I don't do it on exchanges. I don't do it on any exchanges. I just find other Bitcoiners and exchange it privately. Right? It's a one-on-one exchange at that point. It's a cash exchange, essentially a digital cash exchange, right? And so I get dollars, they get Bitcoin. We both move on our way. I do what I need to do with my money, and they do what they want to do with their Bitcoin at that point, right? So that's the type of so it almost forces people in the Bitcoin space to become good network people with other Bitcoiners and other people of the same mindset, which I like.
Yeah, I was just going to ask you, is there like a platform that I think Clubhouse is a popular one for Bitcoin, but
But
is
yeah,
there
yeah,
anywhere
the
else?
Clubhouse is a good one. And then just literally physically meeting other Bitcoiners, right? Like that's just as simple as that, right? Like physically meeting other Bitcoiners is how I have found the people that will help me liquidate some of my Bitcoin when I want to liquidate some of it. They're also the people that, hey, if they wanted to sell some of their Bitcoin, they would probably be able to contact me if I wanted to buy some of it privately, right? Now, how do I get my Bitcoin? I just do it through Cash App, right? Like I run businesses on a Venmo, PayPal, and Cash App. And so when I have spare money, instead of putting it in a savings account, I literally just buy the Bitcoin and send it to a private wallet, right? I don't really now the private wallets that you want to pick, right? Again, this might be a little bit more technical than most people, especially if you're just hearing about this or don't know much about it. The wallets that I pick allow me to uh, individually look at my UTXOs. So do you know what that is?
I don't personally know what that is. We use Electrum Wallet. I don't know if that applies there. I'm not
I'm not
really in control
100%
of the
sure
Bitcoin
about
network.
Electrum Wallet. It
Okay.
might not, but just as a broad, quick level kind of overview, think of a Bitcoin wallet just like a normal wallet. But when you add Bitcoin to it, it's not a balance like you would see on a bank account, right? Your dollars don't just keep adding up and then they all kind of congeal into one thing. When you like say I sent you $100 worth of Bitcoin, that's $100 bill that's now in your wallet. When someone sends you a $50 worth of Bitcoin, that's a $50 bill that's in your wallet. And they stay as individual bills, right? And so when you go to say pay for something that costs you $20 and you pull out the $100 bill that I sent you, the $100 of Bitcoin that I sent you, it's one clump. And that person that you paid can see that you had $100 because you pulled out $100 bill. They have to give you change, right? That's what it's called an unspent transaction, right? So when I send you some money, that's an unspent transaction. You have $100 worth of Bitcoin that's unspent. When you go to use it at a future date, that bill you'll have to break, or if it literally happens to be, you know, let's just hypothetically say the thing you bought is $90, then the person, whoever the merchant or whoever you sent that money to pay for something, only has to give you $10 of Bitcoin back. So they'll only see that your account, right? So what I'm saying is when you transact with people, the transactions are transparent, but the only person that knows that it's you is the person you paid, right? Just like if I paid you in cash in person, you're the only person that knows what happened there. But say I had $1,000 bill. Well, now you know that I have $1,000 bill. You see what I'm saying? So the wallets that I use allow me to select which UTXOs to pay people with. So if I'm going to a restaurant and they're only charging me $20, I'm going to pay with a small UTXO, not $100,000 UTXO, because now that restaurant can see that I have $100,000 in my wallet. Does that make sense?
That makes perfect sense, actually. And so, what wallet do you use, or what are some wallets that are examples of ones that would allow you to do that?
Sparrow Wallet, a desktop wallet. And again, I don't live in a country where I need it on my phone, right? So I use a desktop wallet. Sparrow Wallet is a good one. Another good one is Wasabi. They all allow you to look at your individual UTXOs and choose which ones to spend when you want to spend them, or send them, right? Even if you're not spending them, maybe you're just sending them to another wallet, right? It allows you to grab the right bills to send to another wallet, right? So then you can manage. Hey, I have a Wasabi wallet that has my really large UTXOs in it, my really large bills, and I have another wallet with a bunch of little bills in it, right? So that maybe that one I can transfer to a phone app or whatever, so when I want to use it for it just allows you to have more privacy of exactly what people are going to see. Does that make sense?
That makes perfect sense. And it sounds like this option or these options would be good if you plan on like having a lot of flux in and out of the wallet, like you're trying to
Mm-hmm.
use it and liquefy it and then maybe put some back.
Yeah,
So,
for most people, this is more high level because they're not really going to be using it that much, right?
right.
Now, for example, or maybe they're only going to be using it kind of like I use it, right? Hey, I'm only going to cash it out every now and then, and it's usually going to be in large amounts. Then it really doesn't matter at that point, right? Like it's like I'm just going to use it anyway, and I'm going to transact with people in private anyway, so it's not that big of a deal. Um, and then let's put it this way: depending on what happens governmentally, right? With the government in the United States, there may be some times where things like mutiny wallet, right, where you're using federations, right? That's a new concept that's in Bitcoin that's really kind of awesome, where you put your Bitcoin into a federation. Think of it like a farmers market group, right? Where hey, this county or this town or this connection of people all use Bitcoin, that they want to use it privately. And so what they do is they just, for example, I'll put in, I don't know, $20,000 of Bitcoin into this group, right? And so that means that now that when I put in the $20,000 worth of Bitcoin, they hold my Bitcoin and they give me back eCash, right? And so now eCash can be used within that group completely privately because there's no tracking of that and nobody can see any transactions within that group. But the group is a group that you belong to. It might be your county, it might be your town, it may be your private farmers market, right? And so now you can make transactions for food and products and gas and everything without ever setting off any transactional history ever. Like there's no blockchain within that group, right? And the only thing that the blockchain will see is that you added $20,000 of Bitcoin to this federation. And then at a later date, you pull out 20,000 or more or less. It doesn't really matter. They won't really know who it's going to, especially if you use Lightning Network. So those are other strategies that are coming in the future that are already implementable. All people are already using them to make it even more. At that point, it's completely private. At that point, any transaction you do within a federation is 100% private because you're doing it with eCash equivalent to the Bitcoin you put in there.
Are you familiar with Monero at all?
Yeah, yeah.
Is that a
Yeah.
similar concept with like anonymity, like basically just eCash?
So Monero just takes it to a whole nother level. Like
Yeah.
Monero just literally makes no transaction trackable, right? Like if again, at that point, if that's what you're worried about, yes. Like if I was worried about making sure that my transaction has no blockchain traceability, I would use Monero, right? Now the downside to that is Monero has a founder and and so on, and so there's always that possibility that they get shut down or something happens, right? Where, and again, I don't know Monero enough to know if that's a possibility, but in my mind, because there is a founder, because there is a CEO, and et cetera, that is a possibility, right? Just like government corruption happens when there is a government, right? If there is a government, there can be government corruption when there is government officials.
Totally makes sense. So if somebody wants to learn about the federations, for example, where is the place that you would hear about like that happening
Uh,
locally
uh,
or in your region?
um, BTC sessions.
Okay.
Yeah.
Where's that?
So that's he's a
Oh,
YouTuber out of Canada. He has a
okay.
YouTube channel. That's actually where I get most of my Bitcoin, like the intricacies of the Bitcoin wallets, networks, all the cool things that can happen with Bitcoin. Like, because that's the thing, right? Like people just think Bitcoin is a this digital coin thing and you put it on a wallet and that's about where it kind of ends, right? And then you start realizing that it's a technology that has a whole lot of other capabilities. And if you are into that sort of stuff, that's who I would recommend, starting with somebody like BTC Sessions. He's on Twitter, he's on YouTube. His YouTube channel is excellent. He has lots and lots of tutorials on all of this information that I just talked about, the UTXOs and explaining it correctly, all of that type of stuff, all the different wallets, hundreds of wallets, all of these federations, all this new type of stuff that are coming out to essentially, because that's the thing, right? Like inside of a federation with eCash, there are zero fees. there are no fees. You're essentially transacting for free within those federations and privately, 100% privately. So it's one of those things where some of the drawbacks to the blockchain, Bitcoin blockchain, as traditionally used, start to disappear when you start getting into a little bit more technical aspects. And right now they're technical, but eventually they'll become secondhand, right? Eventually it'll just be integrated into the app and, just, hey, you want to transact with this person? Do you want to do it privately or not privately, right? It'll be a flip of a switch later on, and it'll probably come faster than we think.
That makes a lot of sense. This is great, actually, because I haven't had anybody on the podcast talking about Bitcoin. I didn't know we were going to go here, but it's really good information. And we got into it a couple years ago, but I'm still very much in like my infancy is actually learning about the technology itself. So I'm really excited to learn
Yeah,
about the
yeah.
potential there.
BTC Sessions is definitely the one of the technology. Right. He has videos obviously about what is Bitcoin and why should you invest in it, or why is it what it is and what makes it different than the others. Right. That's valuable information because that's where most people are going to need to start. But then there's the technical side of what I just explained, and that is incredibly valuable, especially if you make the decision that Bitcoin is for you. Right. Like that's, in my opinion, it should be for everybody. But if that's the thing, is you have to personally decide, right? Like there, even in El Salvador, right? A lot of people don't tell you this. In El Salvador, it's still, even though it is a currency there, right? It is legal tender there. I would say 50% of El Salvadorians or less actually use Bitcoin to its full potential, or even know how to use it, because it's still an opt-in system, right? You still have to be the one that takes the plunge. And because at that point, right, the whole premise of Bitcoin is it's your money. You are now responsible for it 100%, right? And a lot of people just may not be willing to take that leap.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like that's a reflection also of our healthcare system too, and people just not wanting to take responsibility for their health, their lives, etc., and prefer to just offset that to some authority figures. But I do feel like that we're kind of coming to the end of that as an era. Especially, I think COVID really accelerated people's like awakening to the systemic issues that we're facing and how we really do need to start to be more mindful and conscious about the decisions we're making for ourselves and our health and our families and our communities. So I think Bitcoin is a really, it's like a gateway drug into, I mean, you can come at health through Bitcoin. I think
Mm-hmm.
you can come
Bitcoin
at
through health.
Bitcoin through health. Yeah, exactly. It can
Yeah.
really go either way.
Yeah. And luckily enough for me, it was kind of a mixture of both, right? Like Bitcoin came first as far as like using and doing, right? And then not shortly after that is when I started reading about, Jack Cruz's work. But that was before he even was talking about Bitcoin. So I didn't link them together until later, right? As far as uh, the healthcare system or health in general, especially as first world countries, that is incredibly linked to your monetary stability, right? Like let's put it this way: you will, if you don't have monetary stability, financial stability, you will be subject to whatever happened in COVID, essentially, right? Like people literally lost their jobs
Yep.
if they didn't take the vaccine, right? Like that would not have been an issue if you would have been saving in Bitcoin, for example, right? You would have been like, well, you know what? I'm not going to take the vaccine. I don't need this right now. I'm going to take some time off and take care of myself and my family and figure out what the heck's going on with all this stuff and process this information at my own pace instead of being forced. Um, because I have the financial stability for the last 3 or 4 years of saving in Bitcoin versus dollars, right?
Yep.
Right. Like
Yep.
that simple thought experiment immediately highlights the importance of your health and how the healthcare system is designed to ensure that you are, I don't want to say permanently sick, but permanently dependent on the healthcare system, which then requires you to be permanently fiat farming for someone else, right? Because that's how most people get their healthcare, right? If you had to get your healthcare privately, like that, like I had to when I moved to my own private coaching job, that's a whole different ballgame, right? You're paying a lot more money at that point than if you get your healthcare through your employer, right? And if you get your healthcare through your employer, now you're subject to the employer's rules and regulations, right? So that was really, really highlighted, hopefully to everyone, but some people are not going to to say that during COVID, right? Like the 2020 through 2022 was the mandates, all of it, right? Like even as late as 2022, where hospitals were literally firing nurses for not getting vaccinated, right? And then not even a year later, that is no longer true, right? And so what do you like? It's one of those things where they got you when they could because of financial instability.
Yeah, absolutely. So for people who are kind of new to this still, we kind of already touched on it a little bit, but just to really hit it on the nose, can you compare and contrast fiat versus Bitcoin or decentralized currency versus fiat currency?
Yeah. So as far as Bitcoin goes, right, it is you're not able to proliferate it, right? So the its unique thing is that there will never be more than 21 million Bitcoin, right? It's also unique that it's 100% digital, meaning it's infinitely divisible, right? So it can absorb an infinite amount of monetary value, right? So the price of Bitcoin is essentially infinite, because as the more people interact with it, the more monetary value it will absorb, right? Um, there are other things that make it even more decentralized, and those are, the miners being not one place, right? It's all over globally. And another crucial thing, which BTC Sessions also talks about, is nodes. Anybody can run a node. That is a verification of the blockchain independently of the miners, right? So you can run a node, I can run a node, and that means that now I can verify transactions and I can accept or not accept uh, to run an upgrade, for example, right? So that's where soft forks and things of that nature come in. Like if somebody were to, and people ask about this, and I'm kind of glad that you asked this, is what if somebody decides to change Bitcoin? I'm like, well, if you run a node, you don't have to change anything, right? You get to decide which version of the blockchain you run, right? And so if somebody changes it, that actually it's already happened. The history has already happened. That's how Bitcoin or uh, Bitcoin Cash came to be, right? Is somebody thought that Bitcoin should work this way, which is how Bitcoin Cash works, and other people thought no, it should stay the same, and that's how Bitcoin still is Bitcoin, right? It's because the people running the nodes that accepted the version of Bitcoin Cash, they upgraded their nodes to run Bitcoin Cash, and that became its own network, right? And people that didn't want that to happen just voted by not changing, right? So think of it this way: if you get a Microsoft update, which I freaking hate,
Yes, the worst.
you can choose not to update it, and your computer will run completely fine. It'll continue to run exactly like it should. Nobody is requiring you to update anything ever, right? And that is also what makes Bitcoin blockchain also valuable, is you are 100% in control of what blockchain the blockchain that you interact with, and the future of how it moves on for you personally.
And so it sounds like relative to fiat, which is just, I mean, we're all living through probably one of the worst inflationary periods
Yeah,
ever. That can't happen in Bitcoin because there's a fixed number.
yeah, yeah. So now, exactly. So now let's compare it to fiat. Fiat is inflationary by design. It has to. The reason is because if you don't inflate it, people will save it. And so if you save it, the price of things goes down, which is actually what should be happening, right? So let me just put it this way, right? Technology and infrastructure is always improving, right? So let's put it this way: does it cost more to farm potatoes now or 20 years ago, right?
Same. I mean, well,
It's less. It's
yeah,
less because technology has improved.
right,
One
right, right.
tractor can now farm hundreds of acres versus before you needed hundreds of tractors to run hundreds of acres, right? Monetarily speaking, it costs less to produce the same product. But why is the product going up? Because inflation is ensuring that the product prices go up so that you continue to spend your money. And if you continue to spend your money, that means that you always have to be on the treadmill of, hey, now I have to work for 45 years just to get by, right? I can't just, because let's put it this way. This also goes back to mitochondrial biology. When you are young and you're full of water, you can endure 24-hour shifts 3 or 4 days a week. I've done it, right? Like I've literally done it, right? You can make an incredible amount of money in your 20s if you just employ that tactic. You could be retired before you're 25 if you know what you're doing, and work extremely hard. But your money is being inflated away. So that won't happen. But if your money was deflationary, or at least not able to be inflated, now it can happen. You see what I'm saying? It's by design. It's a system that's by design. The fiat system is a governmental implementation to ensure that its citizens always are a workforce. Right? That's the way I view the fiat system versus a decentralized monetary system. A decentralized monetary system essentially allows you the freedom to do exactly what I described and leverage time appropriately. Right. That's something that I think Jack Cruz would completely agree with. Hey, if you are, I don't know, a doctor or a lawyer or somebody who's going to make a lot of money, he's like, go all in, destroy yourself in the first, your second decade of life, right? Like your 20s all the way through. He's like, then recover, right? Like literally you can, because if anything that we know about circadian biology and mitochondrial biology is it is very fixable if you do the right things with enough consistency and intensity, um, even in your later years, 40s and 50s. Well, imagine if you could do that at 27, right? At 27 or 37, right? That in that decade of your life, because you worked your ass off from 19 until 27, and you know, happened to just like, for example, you do a trade, right? This is what I did, like, and which is what I'm saying, like my life story kind of highlights some of this stuff. At 19 years old, I was making $10,000 a month by working one job, which is in the trades, right? So working auto body, right? And then at night, I would work another job for 8 hours and make another 5,000. So at 19 years old, I was making $15,000 a month, literally. Not too many people make that kind of money, even as a professional, right? Like even at the you'd have to be a lawyer to make even more money than that. Lawyers, doctors, etc. You'd have to have a degree at that point. But this is right out of high school in a trade, making that kind of money. Um, but the thing is, I only had it in dollars, and just like dollars are meant to do, they're meant to be spent, right? Because of inflationary things and things of that nature. You tend to, and at that age, you also are a little bit more compulsive. So, I had cars, I had toys, and all of those types of things. They ate up all that money, right? If I would have, and I still saved money, right? I still had a savings account, but 5 years later, when I get married, that savings account doesn't buy me a house. There was still 40,000. It got me a down payment, right? So it gives you the illusion of progression. But if that would have been Bitcoin 5, 6 years later, that would have been 4 to 5 times more money than those 40. That would have been a house, right? So it immediately starts to put time into perspective of what are you trading for time, and how are you going to capitalize on that later, right? So that's probably the best non-technical way that I like to describe a fiat system versus a decentralized monetary system.
That's very insightful, and I can also totally relate. Like in my early 20s, I was working I was doing an internship at a chemical company on nights from like 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. and then I would go to the gym, and then I would go to classes at college until like 3 p.m. and then I would maybe sleep like 4 hours or something and do it all over again.
Yeah,
I
and
mean,
you probably sustain that for several weeks, maybe
yeah,
even
oh
more.
yeah.
Yeah,
Oh
you,
yeah.
you see what I'm saying? Like, because of mitochondria and because of how everything is kind of time dilated, your time infinitely rewards you when you're young, infinitely. You just got to find the right vehicle for that reward to then be capitalized later, which used to be money, right? That's the point of money, right? Uh, Fiat money and decentralized money, they're both money. They just work differently, right? Fiat money is meant to keep you working, and decentralized money is meant to keep you sovereign, meaning you have 100% decision making of exactly what you want to do and when you want to do it, because you can go all out for 5 years, and then if you decide, you can be like, hey, I'm not going to do anything for a few years, and that's fine, right? It gives you more ebb and flow of your energy and how you're being rewarded and how you can use your energy later on.
Yeah, and when you start learning about this, I feel like it's impossible to not see the parallels like you were just drawing between health and finance and health and wealth. and how they're just very inextricably linked. And as long as you're a slave to somebody else's dream, let's say, you're going to be on that treadmill, both financially, and you're going to also be burning yourself out health wise. And I think a lot of people are doing that. And I think it's really sad, honestly, especially the more that I've worked with a lot of clients. A lot of them are working jobs that they're not necessarily passionate about. And a lot of this just comes down to very fundamental, like, their health is perhaps a sign, like issues in their health is perhaps a sign of these deeper issues going on in their life that they're not addressing and that aren't always easy to address. But the thing that I have noticed is once you start incorporating, more sunlight and seeing the sunrise and grounding and just getting back into nature, I feel like it makes you think more clearly so you can actually be honest with yourself and see what you're doing that's not serving you.
Yeah, I'm glad that you brought that up. That's actually probably the one thing that I noticed right away, even before the cell phone tower thing, was that my foresight into most people would call it intuition, right? Training intuition, right? Going back to right before I did my 2020 powerlifting meet and totaled the biggest total that I totaled, et cetera. And that was a world record at that time. That whole year leading up to that, because I started the training for that meet. I did that meet in April of 2020, so right when the whole shutdown thing started happening, right? So I started the training for that in May of 2019, so a year before, right? And I started in the summertime, intentionally implementing all these strategies of, hey, I'm going to get, because the sun gets up really early here at like 5 a.m. The sun is up, and I would go to work from 7 a.m. and get off at 3 p.m. So I would take my lunch break in the middle because I worked out in the oil field. And so I could do whatever I want. So I would suntan in the middle of the day, get up early in the day and do my morning daylight stuff and eat my breakfast and then go to work. And then I'd get home at 3 p.m. I'd work out. And then the rest of the afternoon, I just did just work outside all summer long. And that prepped me for just what you said was I had a much more clearer sense of exactly how my body was running that whole year. So I knew exactly how hard to push, when to cut it back. Decision making was a lot more like, even going back to like my 9 to 5 job. There was a lot of projects going on at that time, and I was just much more clear headed in project management at that time, where decisions were clear and precise, and it only ended up being and manifesting in a very, very spectacular performance in the spring of 2020, right? And then fast forward to living next to a cell phone tower and disrupting my circadian mechanisms to the point where now I had brain fog. I had to implement a lot of aggressive cold exposure just to function for 4 or 5 hours. And that whole thing really highlighted, like I mentioned at the beginning, that your circadian mechanism really controls just about everything, even your decision making, and even how you interpret certain situations.
Absolutely, that's the case. I mean, I've experienced it personally. I only came into the light story space in April of 2023. That's when I found Jack Cruz through the Rick Rubin podcast with Huberman, and it was very like eye-opening and just rapid flux period of my life. So prior to that, I did my PhD at Princeton, and I was in the midst of a postdoc when I found that podcast. And first of all, I felt very almost scandalized because I couldn't believe that I hadn't heard about this story sooner. I was like, I feel like I wasted so much time. But at the same time, I appreciate the more centralized perspective too, because now, like, basically I had the scientific understanding to incorporate everything Jack was saying in that podcast and all of his other resources, his blogs, etc., into a framework that really clicked for me almost immediately. And so I personally saw major differences in just the way that I felt, my recovery. I started moving all my workouts outside. We like canceled our gym membership, and my recovery and my ability to perform at a high level is so much better when I'm working out outside. Like, it's literally a 9-day difference. I don't get sore. I feel like I can lift for more reps, like just getting a better pump in. And of course, that's like red and infrared light, also the UVA light and the nitric oxide story. And there's like all of these, also the UVB part and like the endorphins. So I feel like everything in the natural environment, as well as the grounding, getting free electrons from the earth, is culminating to optimizing human performance. And yet so many people are just completely aloof to it.
Yeah, that's what actually led me and my one of my friends, Eurus. He's Latvian. He lives in the UK. We started a podcast 2.5 years ago. Yeah, 2.5 years ago, called Becoming Superhuman, right? Because of exactly what you are highlighting, that uh, low hanging fruit, most people would consider this low hanging fruit, going outside, working out outside, because essentially it's free, right? Like you can do it in your side yard, right? And that by itself improves so many aspects of mental and physical performance that it's hard to quantify how much, right? And it's hard to say, oh, you will perform better. I can equivocally say that, but it's hard to be able to really put that and wrap it all up into one thing because it's affecting so many systems, right? So many systems. And so we've just dedicated literally the last 2.5 years to highlighting all the different types of systems that get interacted. And then at the end of the, when we wrap up a podcast, how do you do all this? Well, you get outside, you ground yourself, and you interact with a lot of sunlight as much as possible locally, right? And that may mean that you have to interact with a lot more cold than you might be wanting to, depending on where you live, right? That also dictates, because we all come, me and my friend, come from the sports performance type world, right? So, a lot of people focus on macros and food in that world. And that also highlights, hey, because of these mechanisms and how they all interact, you actually kind of have to vary the food that you eat seasonally in order to get the correct benefits that you're thinking that you're going to be getting from just eating a monolithic way year round, right? And I don't know how many countless people have told me, hey, in the winter, I switched from eating all my carbs to eating more fats and eating less fruit, and my stomach issues went away. And now I can digest things properly, right? And it's one of those things where all of this goes back to the same story of the more outside time you spend, the more you interact with the environment and correctly, how would I say, signal the environment that you live in on your skin and your eyes, and also signal the environment correctly on your gut, right? Because if you take in the surfaces, all your surfaces that interact with the environment are your skin, your eyes, and your gut, right? If you that's all of you that's interacting with the environment. So the skin and the eyes, that's the easy stuff. Get outside often, get um, grounded, mitigate as much non-native EMF as possible, both visible and non-visible. And then eat seasonally so that your gut, which is the other part of your body that interacts with the environment, also correctly gets the same signal, right? Like that, in that one paragraph, I've described what every human should strive to do wherever they live. The intricacies or the details are, where do you live and what kind of environment do you need to mitigate, right? And that's where me and you might come in, right? Like as far as like, hey, you live here, this is kind of your EMF exposure range. You might need to get a Faraday cage for your bedroom, right? You might need to implement a grounding mat, or you might need to, there's all kinds of ways to skin the cat, if you will, depending on your living situation and exactly where you live. Uh, and that's where it gets confusing, right? That's where people get confused because they don't understand that perspective.
Yeah, I often get questions that highlight the lack of understanding that people can have because it's like I feel like there's a lot of needless confusion in some ways that like people it's like a reflection of the centralized healthcare system where they just want to be told what to do. And when I'm working with people, I'm trying to empower them to be able to answer their own questions and how to think well. So, at some level, in the beginning at least, a lot of that is like giving my perspective on the situation, what I would do if I was in their shoes, but ultimately providing the information that will allow them to make good decisions for themselves and their families based on these principles in quantum biology and light biology. And that's like the ultimate, I would say, like health glow up is when you can actually analyze the situation for yourself. And now you don't need anybody else to tell you what to do because you're empowered with that. And also, as it relates to seasonal eating, super important from many perspectives. And I always kind of roll my eyes when there's all this rhetoric about like, cattle causing global warming, et cetera, et cetera. And there's no mention of the global food supply chain contributing to like greenhouse gases and pollution. And if we were able to, each of ourselves, like just focus on eating more locally, seasonally, maybe shopping at farmers markets, that will make a much bigger difference on like, let's say, pollution and the health of our planet versus culling cows in Ireland and here because like they're methane producers or whatever. It just
or,
doesn't make
or
any
even
sense.
transporting bananas across the planet.
Exactly.
Like that doesn't make any sense to me, right? Like
Correct.
in the concept of what you described of emissions and pollution and things of that nature. You're 100% right. That's never ever mentioned, right? How am I getting oranges and strawberries and raspberries year round at my local market, Walmart or whatever? It's because it's being transported here. That's way more pollution than any cow is ever going to give off. Just the act that you are supplying that level of food intake for the whole country, not to mention the whole planet, in places where those things don't grow. That means they had to be transported there. Transportation of those goods costs a lot more pollution than any other type of really thing that we do. I mean, we know that, right? Like people are trying to get people to not fly on airplanes. I'm like, well, how do you think food gets transported across countries, right? Like,
Exactly. Exactly. That's why you can really see like the cow and animal-based eating, I feel like, is really this false flag within the climate change narrative. And it's really about control, I think. It's more so about controlling what people do, controlling your ability to move through your environment, and it has nothing to actually do with the health of the planet. And something that people can just start easily doing is when they go to the grocery store, before you pick something up that you're going to eat later, look at on the label and see where it just came from. If it
yeah,
came from, Central
another
America,
country.
and you live in Massachusetts, maybe we should rethink this.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And I mean, it's one of those things where people just, because it's not even like this is that long ago, right? This is a recent phenomenon, right? Like
Yeah.
50 years ago, you could not go to a grocery store and get bananas that came from Ecuador, right? Or any of like this is a new phenomenon. If you ask your great grandparents, what they ate in the winter, it would be none of the stuff that you're eating, right? Like that's just how it is. But people don't really, it's one of those things where, well, almost a little bit into the entitlement syndrome of like, well,
Yeah.
I work really hard and I have all this money. I should be able to eat whatever the heck I want whenever I want it, right? Like I'm like, you can, like nothing's stopping you from doing that, but you won't do it forever. Trust me, there will be a consequence to pay for that type of action. Not because I'm telling you that that's good or bad. I'm just like, you're not designed that way, right? Like that's the consequence, right? Like just like using a tool incorrectly, you can still use the tool incorrectly. That doesn't mean that there won't be a consequence for that.
Absolutely. And I think yeah, there's just so many upsides to eating a seasonal approach from your biology, from a planetary standpoint. And I really think a lot of the striving for comfort and convenience that we see among people today is also largely due to like the low agency, low dopamine state from all the blue light toxicity and the tech abuse that's creating this constant like compulsive behavior to eating like hyper palatable, highly processed foods or drugs, alcohol, like name your addiction and people that things that people abuse, all really comes back to this inability to have like a stable, elevated dopamine level because you're sun deficient ultimately.
Yeah, yeah, some deficient or degrading melanin at an
Yeah,
accelerated rate, right? Like both again, just like Jack Cruz highlights, there's always two sides, right? It's not just about the sunlight; it's also about ultimate darkness, right?
the
Like ultimate
darkness, yes.
quietness, right? And one of those or both of them can be the contributing factor to your potential to the potential outcome that you're seeing, right? It can, and for most, it is the lack of sunlight, but then there can also be too much demand at night, right? Like that's another phenomenon that you'll see is, hey, you're depleting your dopamine at such a high rate because you are being inundated by electromagnetic fields that you're literally shunting melanin to dopamine at such a high rate that you are going to run out of dopamine. You run out of melanin, right? So it's both sides. It's that, and that is the beauty of the thinking decentralized is that there's always two sides of the same coin, and or there's always a positive and negative that needs to be thought about, right? Not just the sunlight and grounding. It's also what happens at night. It should be dark. That's probably what I see the most in females. Like
Mm-hmm.
like men, well, at least from the demographic of the people that I get contacted with, most of the men that I come in contact with already kind of come from the same background as I do. They usually have a physical type of job that gets them outside. That's not usually what they're lacking, maybe in the way that they're implementing some things. Um, like, sometimes they're like, well, at the wrong time of day is when they get solar exposure, and they're just not able to do that correctly. But most females that I get, because of technology and stuff like that, they're just on technology late into the evening all the time. And that is really where, I find having to focus a lot more attention, because I find that women do a lot more than men. Like, just in general. Like, I'm not trying to be sexist or anything like that. They just do more, right? They if they have children, they are definitely doing more than the man. Like, that is just flat out, right? So they're the one getting up early, getting all the kids ready, getting them to school, preparing lunches. Then they're doing their workouts. Then they're going to their job. Then they're coming home, and then they're keeping up on whatever else house duties. Or if they have a job that keeps them online, they're working late into the evening. Then they get 6 hours of sleep or 5, and then they repeat it, right? And then I'm like, well, you're already doing some of these things wrong, right? But why are you seeing all these results? Because if you're driving such high demand at night to ruin that circadian cycle because of where you live. And they're like, well, I live in Canada. I'm like, that's the problem. I'm like, you live in Canada, and there is no solar exposure to govern that level of energy output for 5 hours at night every night.
Yeah, and I mean, as you mentioned, like the difference between the sexes with regards to like day-to-day activities, I think it's also a reflection of like the nuclear family aspect that's also not very normal for us as a species. Like women are just having to take on way too much. It's like basically they have to take on all the tasks they were already doing more evolutionarily, plus also working the job and bringing in money and like sometimes
And
supporting the
that
entire
reflect
household.
that reflects back to the monetary system, the fiat
Yes.
system, right? The reason they're having to do that is because the energy output of again, I'm not trying to be sexist, but the energy output of the male in the family is no longer enough to monetarily keep them stable into the future without the female now contributing some of her energy also to the fiat system because of the inflationary nature of fiat, right? Like, ultimately, that's what's happened.
Yep, absolutely. And it's not sustainable. And I think that's also why we see especially a lot of the autoimmune diseases in women. Basically, I feel like there's some level of like self-betrayal that goes on in that process and not setting boundaries, not speaking their truth. And I think that's also just I don't know, if more of like a socio-cultural aspect of the way that women interact with other people, but I feel like there's this like inflexibility to actually speaking up for themselves. And so I think that oftentimes reflects at the level of autoimmune diseases, in particular, like the thyroid disease, if you want to get into the more esoteric aspects of the thyroid being associated with the throat chakra and stagnating that chakra, basically creating all this stuck energy in that area, which is where the thyroid is. So I think it's really interesting. And also, as we've highlighted throughout the conversation, it is something that people can absolutely do something about. It's not like this terminal, you're just stuck. You have to start building momentum in a positive direction. And then, even if that's just going out and seeing the sunrise for a few minutes in the morning, start to just make some tiny steps in the right direction. And then over time, you can get like these massive returns.
Yes, yes, yeah, and that's the display of a non-linear effect, right? If you if
Yep.
if you upgrade your food, right, you start getting plenty of DHEA, so that now when you do spend some time outside, you collect more of those electrons, and then maybe depending on your environment, you also introduce some cold at the same time. That now yields, hey, the 10 or 15 minutes that I do have to be outside in the morning yield more return. Right. And you will feel those, right? Like, you'll feel that in clarity and then mental thought. And you will feel more energized from a mental perspective, I find, first. And then that might start to manifest later on, especially if you start cleaning up some other things at night, so that you can actually correctly let your body interpret how to switch over to the nighttime mode, right? Because the way I like to describe this is your body is capable of literally everything. Literally everything. The problem is it can't do everything at once, right? It has to be optimized or switched over. The way I like to describe it is, think of your body is capable of producing everything it needs, absolutely everything, through an assembly like type manner. The problem is the assembly line has to be switched over to assemble these certain things and switched over to these certain things at certain times of the day. And that's what circadian rhythm is, right? Is the body correctly assessing, hey, at this time of day, if we just do these small switches that require very little energy because we're getting different energy inputs from the environment at this time of day, we can optimize for these certain outcomes. So your body starts to optimize certain manufacturing capabilities at certain times of the day because it requires less energy to do it that way, right? And so when you correctly start inducing certain signaling like morning daylight exposure or cold exposure or a combination of all of those, and then UV exposure at certain times of the day, and then darkness at other times of the day, you are correctly letting the body interpret the right assembly line setup for the correct processing that needs to happen at that time of day. And when you start doing that chronically, that's when you really start making strides.
Yeah, and I always thought that I was a night owl throughout high school and college, and just I always identified with that chronotype, quote unquote. And now, the more I learn about this, the more I think that chronotypes are kind of BS, and it's really a artifact of the modern environment that is even a thing. And when I started implementing exposure to sunlight during the day and morning light and blocking blue light at night, I immediately my sleep schedule shifted. I got sleepy earlier and I woke up earlier. It's just like a natural. It's
Mhm.
what your body will naturally shift to if
That's
you're doing
actually
it.
what I've experienced with just about every female that tells me that. In
Yep.
fact, more than a dozen females. I really can't sleep at night. I'm like, yeah, you'll be fine. Just do what I ask you to do for, I don't know, a week or two, right? I'm like, give me a month, right? And then next thing you know, they're like, man, I'm waking up at like 6 o'clock. I'm like, when does the sun come up where you're at 6 o'clock? I'm like, yeah, that's how it should work. I'm like, everything is working correctly. They're like, yeah, but shouldn't I sleep in more if I didn't go to bed early? I'm like, well, no, you should wake up when the sun wakes up, irrelevant of when you went to bed. That may mean that you need to we need to work a little bit harder on your nighttime routine. But yeah, essentially that's how it works. They're like, well, what happens when it gets, when it's winter time? I'm like, yeah, that the reason why winter exists is because that's when you're supposed to get more sleep and more recovery. I'm like, that's the nature of living where you live. I'm like, yes, I get it that that's not how society is set up, but that's how nature and the place where you've chosen to live is set up.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I get that question a lot as well. Like, what do I do in the wintertime if you're like super northern latitude? And yeah, it is what it is. And at some level, you're not really meant to live too north. There's not typically a lot of life in those areas. Let's say Alaska, for example, it's, kind of barren. And I think Scandinavia may be somewhat of an exception. Like Jack talks about the magnetic flux there, and they have all like the thermal pools and everything that they can leverage to get, and obviously the cold as well, which is supplementing. But yes, I mean, if you look at the animal life, you see animals are hibernating during that time of year. They're getting more rest. They're, preparing for that time of year, and then they're balancing that with spring and summer where you're much more active and fertile, and like you see like the mating behaviors changing, and the color of the pelt changes, and like that's part of the melanin story and how that relates to fertility and like the leptin melanocortin pathway, and it's like everything is connected.
Yeah, it is. And I think the biggest disconnect is that we feel, or as modern humans, that you aren't part of that system, right? Like that's essentially what modern society has, quote, ingrained into modern humans, is that you're not part of that system. You're a separate system, right? And we can do whatever we want. I'm like, that's the fallacy, right? Like that is the fallacy of thinking in that manner, is that you will have problems and the problems are already manifested, right? Like most of these problems are what we consider as uh, uh, there's diseases that don't have a cause, right? Well, there's a name to it. I can't even think about that. But a lot of these things where more and more diseases, they're like, well, we don't really know what causes it. I'm like, yeah, that's the circadian manipulation effect of you're just dysregulated enough that you're falling apart essentially.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, if you just consider like proof of work, the proof of work that our societal structure is not working is the rates of chronic disease across all age groups, essentially at this point, even young kids getting type 2 diabetes and autism rates just soaring, and all of the chronic disease burden that we typically only would see in older adults for the most part, and now is being reflected in children. And so we really need to make changes there. And I was talking about this with Scott yesterday too, and how harmful it is that especially now, kids were already indoors for school during the best parts of the day to get like their midday sun, but now on top of that they're glued to screens. Like all the schools have the Chromebooks, and they're basically forced to be on screens all day under fluorescent lights behind glass, and it's wreaking havoc on their mental health and their physical health.
Yes, yes, I do see that a lot with children, which is another, we started homeschooling because of the COVID thing,
Yep.
but we're not going back because of all these other reasons, right? Like that's just how it is. Like my kids today, right? Like they spent the first 4 hours outside, right, playing, right, and now they're indoors, doing some of their schooling, and they'll probably do some school for 2 or 3 hours and then come back outside, right? It's barely getting close to noon here, right? So like basically, we just happen to set it up that way because we can.
Exactly. And that's what freedom looks like, especially when you're, thinking in a decentralized way and your finances are decentralized and your medicine and your healthcare is also decentralized. So I think that's maybe a great place to wrap it up. Do you want to tell people how they can find you and work with you?
Yeah. So I'm mainly active on Instagram. So David Herrera 1119 is my handle for like, what. So again, they've kind of started to melt together, but they used to be where I posted all my powerlifting stuff and all of that training stuff, training related, um, and also some reels and clips of the podcast that I do with Eurus. And then I also have a second Instagram called The Solar Athlete, and that one is more about the specifics of mitochondria and light and grounding and all of the mitochondrial health benefits. There are slides with like some technical stuff on there, and then more and more of just practical stuff of what to do, what to look for, blood work reviews, things of that nature. In both of those, you can just literally click on my bio and it'll take you to my website where you can actually hire me for a consultation or hire me for coaching. Those are the ways that most, and on that website there is also an email address that you can email me to. If you message me on Instagram, it's if you're not somebody that I'm connected to, I probably won't get your message. Like I've already had my Instagram hacked. I just don't really interact with people that I'm not really following, right? Like that's just how it is. So unfortunately, you won't be able to message me directly on Instagram unless it's somebody that I already know.
Fair enough. Yeah, I can totally relate to that, but I think they can definitely, hire you for a consultation and see what you're about if somebody's interested. And I think this was a very, very insightful episode. I'm excited we finally got to unpack some information about Bitcoin. I think I get a lot of DMs about Bitcoin and asking about like how do I start? And I think this was a really good starting point for that. And then we can check out the YouTube channel that you mentioned to learn more. And I just really want to thank you for your time. This was super fun. And maybe we can do it again and focus more on the biology next time.
Awesome. Yeah, no problem. Yes,
All
thank
right,
you.
sounds good.
Okay, have a great
Thank
day.
you. Bye.